good of a job of building people up. Let's see how it goes. As Scott said, first off, good morning. I feel like I'm talking in front of like a North Korean General Assembly with everybody else. The thing I'm going to teach you or talk to you about today is it goes under some writing standards, and I put them up there. There won't be a quiz on this afterwards, so don't worry. I just thought I'd show you that there was actually language written in the Common Core about this. And I just pulled some of the writing standards that we utilize. The conference I went to was the National Forensic League Conference that we had, leadership conference over the summer. And one of the big things is the Common Core for us, because as you saw in that graph that Scott showed you, I don't know who it was who wrote the Common Core, but I want to find that person and kiss them on the mouth, because they created a whole market for us debate and speech type, because several of the Common Cores are written around what we do, which is argumentation and speaking and things like that. So one of the things we did at that leadership conference was how could we as the debate and speech teachers in our buildings better disseminate that information out to the faculty. And these are some of the Common Cores, just a few examples of what we've got that we teach basically every day in our classes. And I thought I put together a lesson this year, and I went up to Scott and I said, I think this is one of the lessons, because he'd asked me to kind of be thinking about that, some of the lessons that could be easily disseminated and done in a variety of classes. So today I thought I'd start off with some of the basic stuff as to what makes argumentation, and do a couple, I hope, fun exercises for you guys in here today. I don't want to exercise you too much because it's January 2nd. Really early. All right, so anyway, basically these Common Core ones here on writing are to write arguments that support claims and analysis and stuff like that, and that's what we're going to show you today. Some of it too ties into reading too. Really, when you're either reading an argument or writing an argument, you're using these same sorts of tools. Some of you may be familiar with Stephen Toulmin. He was a professor and a philosopher. He just died, I think, about 4 years ago or so, but was very prolific up until his death through the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And he came up with a model of argumentation, of what an argument should have. And he had several points to it that, you know, in my graduate classes we took much deeper, and then there are people, of course, who have written off of Toulmin, and I'm sure you guys found this whenever you read academic research. It's the same with him. People will take the same thing and then give it a different name so that they can write a paper on it and thus get their graduate degree. So you might hear things and go, oh, I've heard it called this, whatever. So what I've done today is I've simplified it down to basically 3 steps of what an argument is according to Toulmin. I know there might be people that have read other things and it's called different things, but these are the 3 parts of an argument essentially, according to Stephen Toulmin, which still serve us today. The first is what we call the claim, and it's what the argument is about. Basically, one way you know you have a claim is that it could be formed in the phrase of a question with a quick answer back to it. You know, is Blue Valley High the best school in the state? Yes, that's an argument, okay? That's a claim. So you're making that claim, and then that's pretty clear. The second part is the warrant. And the warrant, aside from being one of the 80s best hair metal bands, Jeff, two songs from Warrant, real fast.
Sometimes She Cries and Down Boys.
Okay. You do not want to know how much 80s hair metal knowledge Jeff Yarnell has. I share an office with him, and it's scary. All right? But the warrant is the reason for the claim, the reason behind the claim that you have. Okay, so as I was kind of thinking this as Scott was up here, and you know, he's like, I don't want to be too brag too much. Well, no, what he was trying to do was give us warrants for why Blue Valley is the best high school in the state. And that's what you would do. You would give reasons. And of course, obviously, the more warrants you have, the better. some people who listen to my debaters often go, why do they talk so fast? And it's because they like to give as many warrants as they possibly can in an 8-minute speech. And sometimes I'd like them to just give like 2 or 3 that were smarter, but that's not what they do. It's going to be a long 2 weeks for us. Okay, anyway. And then the third part is the data, which is the support for the warrant. Usually we call this evidence, or it's the supportive evidence, but it can look a lot of different ways, and we're going to talk about the different ways that it can look here later on. And this is also the area where, regardless of what department you teach in, you have data on things that you can do. And I was thinking of this when I was doing this. I mean, there are some really great ways that you can do this even without writing it. You don't have to be writing a paper, and here is a quote from the book that I'm going to put in as my data. I mean, that's obviously one very good way to do that. But you could be doing a art project where you're arguing that Monet changed the face of art in the world, and here is a picture of Monet as your data, and then you give the example and stuff like that, and as you go on. So, I mean, it's usually in the form of evidence, but it's there. Really good arguments that we have found tend to have 2 to 3 or more warrants, obviously, but 2 to 3 is usually the magic number. 3 is what I usually try to get, because 3 is kind of that universal, especially for a speech. If I was doing a speech, 3 is kind of what people can remember in one sitting or something like that. But, somewhere around there in those warrants. And one of those warrants, usually, if it's really good, refutes one of the opposing arguments against you. And I think that's usually a really handy tip, too, to not just ignore what the other side's saying, but embrace it and then come up with answers to that. And we're going to put together at the end here today a simple little argument that does all of those things, and I'll show you how that looks. And I've got materials for you and stuff as well. But let's look at, first off, some of the common types of data that might be used as evidence. The first is examples or anecdotes. A story, some example that you would give that says, this is my evidence for that. If I was writing, let's say I'm going to make an argument that Holden Caulfield is kind of a loner in there, and I might use examples from the book, and that would be my data to represent that warrant. Make sure they're representative, and we're going to talk about that here in a moment when we talk about some of the biggest ways people make bad arguments. And one of the biggest ways is that they use non-representative examples, but we'll get there. Studies. Obviously, you might have a study, you might have some data. An ACT score is a form of a study really on our students. Our state assessment scores are a form of study on our students. It's literally what we would call the raw data, numbers and stuff like that. And I think that's what a lot of people think is evidence, but it's not the only form of evidence that we have or we use, even though it's obviously very nice. The problem with it, though, is a lot of people can use data that's not very thorough, right? We can cherry pick certain statistics and numbers and stuff like that, and then we can go from there. And then we really get insane. Some of you in here, I know are on Facebook, and I've been on Facebook, and I listen to former students or other people on Facebook whenever some hot topic in politics is around, like gun control or something like that. And I'm usually the one that has to step in and go, please stop that. You're using really bad data or examples, and it's not very good. Never really stops them on the internet. And then expert or qualified opinions. Here's someone who knows what they're talking about. We're going to ask them their opinion on this. Do they back us up on this warrant? If so, again, one of the things you want to be wary of is just how qualified are they, right? We bring in people. That's the thing when people talk to me, I feel for Marcia, for example, every time I watch like the first 2 or 3 episodes of American Idol, because I think as a music teacher, that's got to drive you crazy to see people like that can't sing up there singing. But she could feel my pain every time I turn on any one of the cable news channels and watch people talking, because they'll just stick someone on who starts talking like that, and it's like no one asked them who are you? How do you know this stuff? Why are you up here talking? And what's your degree in or anything else? And they don't. They just get up and talk. And of course, as we talk about, the internet is loaded even more with that. And also motive, and this is where the idea of bias comes in. You know, if someone's giving an expert opinion, but they obviously have a motive to give that opinion, it might be clouded somewhat. I'm always wary about that one, because when I work with my kids here in high school about, and we go over evidence or something like that, and I'll ask them, like, what do you think is the biggest problem with this evidence? The number one thing they'll always say is bias, because that's what they've learned. That's like the big, they're biased. Well, in some ways that's really overused, because if you stop and think about it, anybody who's giving you an opinion is biased for that opinion. Right? It's like, well, sure they say that because they want to say that. Yes, that's why they're saying that. They're biased for that opinion, but what is their motive for being biased, right? You know, a good example, we'll do this all the time. I'm trying to think of an example. Oh, this year, for example, our debate topic was on mass transportation and public investment in mass transportation. And we would get someone who would talk about it, you know, like I read a quote to my students one time from like the Department of Urban Studies or something like that, who said we need better mass transit in our country. And they were like, well, he's just biased for mass transit. It's like, yes, he is. He's not hiding that fact. The title of his article is, "We Need More Mass Transit." That is his bias, as it turns out. But what does he have to gain by telling us all of these reasons, right? Probably not much. However, when I then read a piece of evidence from this guy who like represents this company that makes high-speed rail, saying we need high-speed rail in this country, then his bias might be because it's like, well, yeah, he stands to get a multi-billion-dollar government contract from this, so maybe his bias is a little bit more telling there or something. So those are important things to kind of look at and think about when you're looking at data. And these are three types of data, kind of grouping of the three main types of data that you would have. So let's stop for a moment now that bias is off the table, because that's the one your students will love to run to all the time, and just talk about some of the bad warrants they will use, because they'll use some bad ones, and it's just human nature on a lot of these. And I have, by the way, and I'll be referencing this later on, I've made a share folder for us in the share drive where I'm going to put, anytime I find a really cool article or something that's got an argument, either a good argument or a bad argument in it, but a good example from lots of different areas of the world of what we teach, I'm going to stick it in there. I've got one, a really bad one on pink slime. Remember when the pink slime debate was going around? I shared this with the CA teachers when I did a youth service with them, and it was a terrible argument, the whole pink slime thing, by the way, but it'd be good for a health class or foods class or something like that. I've got one, sorry football coaches, but there's one in there about why like pee-wee football should be banned and stuff. It's not very healthy for the kids and stuff. There's some pretty good warrants in there on that. And then I've also got a sheet that lists like most of the common fallacies, logical fallacies that we call them, which are basically just bad warrants and what they look like. And I'm going to show you three today, because I'm going to set up a little exercise that we're going to do today in reading an article and finding this out. What I have found, and this is what I came to Scott with, why I said this would be a good lesson, is I found that when I was teaching my debaters, like they were making bad arguments, the best way to teach them, probably the fastest way, was to show them a bad argument and let them realize why it was bad, rather than show them a good argument and try to have them get why it was good. And so let's look at three of them, and then you're going to see an example of all three of those at play here in a second. The first one that's very, very common in the bad warrant business is what we call the begging the question fallacy, which is basically you repeat the claim as the warrant. It's a very tricky way to do it. They do it on the cable news networks all the time. I'll try not to be political here, but a certain guy likes to put talking points up next to him while he talks on the air, and somehow that is his warrant as he's talking, but all it is what he just said. It's not really evidence, okay? And so he does that. If you are a parent, I'm sorry, but you do this all the time. Because you say, because I said so. Right? Say, sorry. But that's the ultimate begging the question. When your kid's like, why can't I go? And you go, because I said so. All right? Might be a very good reason to you, but technically it's not really a reason. It's just restating your claim. Okay? My parent-teacher conferences are shorter than most of yours. They're not usually upset about the grades and stuff like that. But I get a lot of them that are upset because they're like parenting tricks are all of a sudden thwarted. They're like, I told them that they couldn't go because I said so, and they said I was begging the question, just repeating my claim. You gotta get better at that. My kids have been in trouble ever since they've been born because they'll be like, why not? I go, well, there's 3 reasons. The next one is what we call a hasty generalization, and this is kind of the one that I alluded to before, which is that the warrant uses data from an example that's atypical of the examples present. Okay? In other words, you kind of cherry pick an example somewhere and you say, well, here, look, this proves that because of this example. But if I were to really look at all of the examples, I'd see that, in fact, it might even be the opposite. Here would be an example. Apples are terrible. My friend had an iPod that crashed 1 week after he bought it. Okay? Pretty atypical example. If we've owned iPods, we know that's usually not the case. They're pretty easy to run and stuff like that, but that's there. This was kind of my big thing in graduate school. This is what I did my paper on and stuff, and hasty generalizations. I looked at that. The example I used a lot of times was that people like to use in the literature is birds. I could prove to you that birds don't fly, right, by using hasty generalizations. Like, say, birds don't fly. Look at the penguin. Look at the ostrich, right? There you go. Boom, done. And so, be hasty generalizations. We can do that. And then the non sequitur. The warrant doesn't really tie into the claim. So you make a claim, and then you give a warrant that sounds really interesting and nice, but it really doesn't prove anything. I thought I'd get topical on us today. Scott Pioli should be fired as Chiefs general manager. The Patriots haven't really missed him since he left there. Hey, you laughing at? I guarantee you someone on a sports talk show will say that exact thing sometime. And the sports talk will be, yeah, that's a great argument. All right, so anyway, that's where we go on that. So, people will do that a lot of times and make those sound great. And you've got to remember, well, what was the original claim? Does that have anything to do with that? So, what I've got today, if there's people that wouldn't mind helping pass out today, I've got a very short article for you today of a really bad argument. You'll figure out why it's bad here. It's going to take you like about 5 seconds to read. You will know once you read the headline that it's a bad argument.
Just kind of had it spread it out.
Oh, well.
So I think he has more than enough.
Behind us, beside us, around us.
Anybody else, Justin? Romney supporters of the world, I'm not trying to rub it in. I was just kind of... She says. as we're finishing up, I'll tell you why I started this one. The election was a big deal in our debate topic this year for a variety of reasons. So we always had to research and have like up to the minute information when we go out to a tournament before the election through September and October of like what the latest polls were and who was likely to win and stuff like that. So we had done all the research and crunched all the numbers, and we had seen a lot of research, our debate team, on the election, who was likely to win and stuff. And it was pretty clear in the research that if you looked at it, you saw good research and good arguments, and you knew what a good argument was, it was pretty clear that Obama was going to win. Sorry, that wasn't, I'm not making that a political statement. It was just the data was pretty clear that Obama was going to win. And so what I thought I'd do, the reason I got this kind of aha moment was, I thought the day of the election, I thought I'd pull up 4 or 5 people that predict a Romney win that day. And I thought, well, I'll just pull one out here and we'll use it as a sort of perfect 20/20 hindsight. It's very rare that you can get someone on a political pundit show or something like that who makes a prediction or a claim that can be proven wrong literally like 6 hours later or something like that. So it was kind of a good way to do that. So I knew at this point, okay, someone's going to write an article pretty soon that says, you know, Romney's going to win. And I had actually quite a few to pick from that day, and I picked on poor Mr. Forbes here because his was the easier to digest of them. And what we can see here are a whole bunch of bad arguments that he used to come to this really bad claim that was ultimately proven false. So let me first ask, what is his claim? If I was in a classroom, this would be a really good opening thing to say after you've given someone a reading assignment. This one's pretty clear. What's his claim? Romney's going to win. And not just that he's going to win, what? He's going to win decisively. He's going to win big. Ironically, I believe he picked the exact number of electoral votes Obama got. But, well, what bad warrants does he make to get there? Can anyone find an example of a bad warrant? Yeah.
Romney's crowds are bigger.
Okay. One of the ones he uses is Romney's crowds are bigger. Okay. What one of the bad warrants did we just see that's an example of a bad warrant? It's a hasty generalization, right? It's also, I don't know if this is really one in there, but I mean, there's one that I include on there that's not in the 3, but it's like the bandwagon approach, right? Everybody, you know, it's like, that one to me, and when I read that, when my kids read that one, they even laughed, because it was like, people were like, everybody's for Romney at the Romney pep rallies. And it's like, if they're not, he's got a bigger problem than just, it's like, if you can't have your pep rally where people are for you, that's probably a problem. But okay, yeah. Hasty generalization. I've been to several rallies, and people have said that they're all for him, okay? So there's one bad warrant. What about, right at the opening, what's the first paragraph? Look at the first 2 paragraphs. What is it? It's all begging the question. Almost 25% of Mr. Forbes' article is begging the question. My kids, in fact, this was kind of slick because even some of my top debaters saw these at first and thought these are data points. Oh, well, he spells out wins in these states. Well, no. If I'm going to say he's winning decisively, don't I also have to say he's going to win those states? It kind of goes without saying. So he's really just begging the question about the first 2 paragraphs. What else? There's a couple other bad warrants there. Yeah?
When he says that southeastern Ohio has a number of evangelical voters, the area also has a polling district.
And that is what?
Non-sequitur.
A non sequitur. They got a coal industry. I guess so. People who mine coal won't vote for Obama. I mean, that could be something, but he doesn't really tie those 2 together. The biggest non sequitur he probably makes is where he spells out how you could have a small popular win and a big electoral win. And then he actually dazzles you with some data there, right? He shows you past elections. It's like, great, I have no idea what that has to do with 2012, but all right, thank you. But that's there. The other thing, too, that I think the whole, because that one paragraph that Jennifer points out is really the heart of the argument. that he uses because he actually refutes. He does his job there. He's a good boy in writing this article, and he says, here's what the other side's going to say. That it's going to look like 2008 again, but it's not, and he uses that data. But he, again, is leaving things out. He's making hasty generalizations because, and this is something that he's very fancy on that a lot of my debaters didn't even get. He shows you all these early voter stuff, right? And that's his data. What doesn't he show you on the early voting? He shows you what type of people are going to vote. Yeah, he doesn't actually show you the early votes, which, if you looked at them, actually were not going his way, which is why he didn't show them. He kind of cherry-picked the data. So those are the bad warrants, and we can see those now. And we kind of talked about this, the problem with his data, so I went a little bit ahead there. He kind of left some things out on the data. Were there anyone catch any other things that you throw out? Okay, so a simple exercise like that with this article, and you could point out some really bad key flaws to an argument that people will use. And that leads us to the biggest question: why is this man a billionaire and I am not? Somehow he gets away with this stuff, and I don't. All right. So with that in mind, now that we've read a bad argument, we can see what a bad argument is, let's construct a good argument. One of the other things I've put in that share folder is a worksheet that if you give to your students, all they have to do is kind of fill in the blanks on some things to make an argument, and then they can use that to write a paper or make a presentation or anything else with an argument. It just has, here is my claim, fill in this little blank, what's my claim, here are my warrants, fill in the blanks, here are my warrants, where's my data, where am I getting my data? So if I were to use that worksheet and make an argument, I could maybe make an argument like this. I could say, Chris Ripper is a nerd. So that's my claim. Chris Ripper is a nerd. My first warrant would be, he's always been a nerd. Okay? Since the beginning of my life. And my data. Look. Actual high school photo that has been floating around the internet that one of my students took while they were at Shawnee Mission West. This was in the, I would say it's in a state championship picture from our forensics team that year, but I still look like that though. So. And Paul Rudd's actually behind me, and he's doing the bunny ears. So he's making fun of me too, so that's not good. All right, warrant 2. I'm way too much into Star Wars. That makes me a nerd. Data. I spent, before I did this presentation a couple days ago, I spent 45 minutes putting away my Star Wars Hallmark ornaments. 45 minutes. Think about that for a moment. That's a lot of Star Wars ornaments. Those are just my ornaments. I won't get into my action figures. So, a lot of it. Okay. Third warrant. I'm friends with John Holloway. Most people call Holloway the cool one. I'll tell you something. Now my data here is I take a poll of the faculty, but it'd break my heart, so I'm not going to do that, but you know, come on. You know. All right. And then I'm going to throw in my last warrant here, which is many might say he's not a nerd because he's married to a hot wife. However, she has poor judgment in men. True. The data from that is the guy she was dating before me was like 375 pounds, and I'm not making that up. He was a big guy. A lot of stories behind that one. Okay, so really it's an easy way to write an essay. You could do, like I said, you could plug in for the data, you could plug in pictures, you could plug in examples of music, you could plug in clips, whatever you want to do for examples or stories or things like that. And all a matter of it is putting together, here's your claim, what's your ultimate claim, and then what are your warrants, what are your reasons for it, and do you have any data to support those reasons? And now that you also know what makes good data, what makes bad data, what makes a good warrant, what makes a bad warrant, you can kind of check them on that, watch them on that, and then they can recreate. And you can write or create just about any argument you want from that little format. Questions or thoughts? I think Scott gave me 45 minutes. Yes. Yeah.
I went to a workshop right before break, and one of the things that they were talking about is your kids aren't used to writing stuff in class, and you're wanting them to lead them or help them in that process. Give them a word bank of words that will help them get through that writing process a little bit better.
There you go. Yeah. And you could even, like I said, with that worksheet, you could goose them along. You could make, if you want to make sure one of their warrants is an answer to one of the most common ones, you could put in that opening, in that worksheet, many might say, ... Put in that argument that many might say, and then how do you answer that? What's your answer back? Okay, thank you.